my fellow citizens, my siblings, with companions from throughout Africa and the world. I greet you peacefully today and solidarity, with a huge deal of humility, that I'm here to tell you about. Encounter that has significantly impacted my journey as an African, a leader, and as a follower of Islam. This story isn't about conflict, but instead one of communication, comprehension, and the ability of truth expressed with conviction and genuineness. Several months ago, I was given an invitation that many were taken aback by. Individuals, myself included, the famous American narrator, actor, and filmmaker. One individual, Morgan Freeman, whose voice has told the tales of our planet, whose presence commands respect from everyone, continents, asked me to meet with them. His group had been engaged in a documentary project that investigates the relationship between religion, politics, and African resistance movements. They learnt about the revolution we're constructing in Burkina Faso, about our Pan-African outlook, as well as regarding the values that direct our fight, opposing neocolonialism and imperialism. Admittedly, I was apprehensive at first. I'm a soldier, not a famous person. I'm my people's servant, not someone who attempts to get international attention. Media, however, after speaking with my advisors and considering the chance, I understood that this could serve as a forum for expressing truths that are frequently kept silent, to clear up misunderstandings, which have afflicted both our continent and our faith for millennia. Thus, I consented to the getting together. The interaction happened in Ouagadougou, in a modest environment, not in some opulent hotel or presidential castle, yet in a small space where we might communicate as humans, devoid of all of the theatrical feigning that frequently goes along with these gatherings. Morgan Freeman and his tiny crew came, and I could sense his sincerity right away. Interest. This dude wasn't coming to lecture me or force his viewpoint on me. He came to hear, to study, to comprehend. First, we exchanged pleasantries. As usual, he talked about his love for Africa, his own homeland, ties to this continent by way of the agonizing legacy of slavery, and his admiration for strong leaders opposing oppression. I was grateful to him for his remarks and recognized the strength of voice has influenced how stories are told globally. After that, we got comfortable in the main topic of our discussion. Morgan. I was immediately asked by Freeman, Captain, I've studied a lot of revolutionary movements, numerous rising leaders, opposing injustice, but something distinct in your methodology regarding the manner in which you discuss faith, particularly Islam, is essential to your fight. Islam has been widely accepted in the West as depicted in a really particular way, frequently linked to radicalism and violence, and yet a Muslim like you, leader discussing liberation, justice, and African unity. Could you please assist me recognize this contradiction? I looked at him for a while, collecting my ideas, as this wasn't a question to be addressed casually or on the surface. This was the query which targets the core of centuries of deception, disinformation, and intentional distortion. So I started to talk, and I did so from the bottom of my heart, from my experience, based on what I understand about faith and history. I said, Mr. Freeman, the inconsistency you mentioned doesn't exist throughout Islam. It can be found in the story that has been created about Islam by those who stand to gain from demonization of it. Allow me to take you on and travel through time, through reality, and by means of the actuality of what Islam is, what it really is. I began by discussing the essential ideas of Islam, frequently disregarded principles, or purposefully hidden in Western conversation. I clarified that Islam meant adherence to peace and God's will. As-salama is the exact greeting we share. Alaikum translates to peace be upon you. Peace be upon the Prophet Muhammad, he said, because the Muslim is the source of people are safe with their tongues in hand, taught us that taking the life of an innocent individual is equivalent to eradicating mankind. Moreover, saving one life is equivalent to saving all of humanity. I don't have interpretations. These are straightforward lessons from the Quran, our sacred text. Morgan Freeman leaned, as I could see, ahead, his full focus concentrating. I went on. The Islam that is, more than 1.8 billion individuals engage in it globally. The Islamic faith that directs. I am the one who leads millions of Africans. That has been a component of African civilization for more than a millennium. Is a faith that values compassion, fairness, knowledge as well as freedom. It's the faith that ended slavery in Arabia at a time when the globe was establishing empires based on slaves. It's a faith that granted women property and inheritance rights, 1,400 rights, including the right to education. Years ago, when women in other civilizations were seen as property themselves, I stopped to let these words to come to an agreement. Next, I deal with the elephant in the room, the terrorist problem, and radicalism. Mr. Freeman, you now brought up how Islam is portrayed in the West as extreme and brutal. Allow me to ask you something. Who gains from this story? When the media in the West displays pictures of terrorists who say they are acting, do they ever display in the name of Islam? You Muslims, hundreds of millions, who denounces these acts? Are they ever inform you that these terrorist organizations killed more Muslim people than anyone else? Individuals? Have they ever told you how numerous radical groups were developed, financed, and used as weapons by Western intelligence services to assist geopolitical objectives? I looked into his eyes. Expand a little. He was paying attention carefully. I'll give you some concrete. I went on to give examples. The Mujahideen in Afghanistan, who thereafter emerged as the Al-Qaeda, was founded by the Taliban, who were CIA trained and equipped to combat, opposing the Soviet Union. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is recorded historical reality. The instability of Libya, Syria's devastation, the chaos in Iraq, which resulted in gaps in authority that extremist organizations taken advantage of, who also destroyed these nations who invaded and bombed them, their governments overthrowing them. It weren't Muslim countries. It was Western powers looking to further their oil interests, strategic placement, as well as regional supremacy. Freeman Morgan took a seat back in his chair, taking in what I had just spoken. I persisted, since this was the time to speak the truth without fear or diplomacy. The story of the Islamic terrorists accomplish a number of goals for imperialism by the West. Initially, it provides justification for military action against the majority of Muslims nations. If you can persuade your population that Muslims are by nature risky and violent, then bombing our nations turns into a humanitarian endeavor, instead of being what it really is: resource, geopolitical control, and extraction. It splits and conquers. To start, by portraying Islam as the adversary, they stop solidarity among those who are oppressed. They keep Muslims in Africa from joining forces with Christians in Africa, from joining the worldwide fight against imperialism and capitalism. Next, I change to discuss Islam in Africa, especially since this is something quite intimate with me and extremely misinterpreted. Islam, Mr. Freeman, has been a component of African culture for more than 14 centuries. The initial Muslims to encounter victims of Mecca's persecution moved to Ethiopia, in modern times Abyssinia, because the local Christian ruler was well known for his fairness. In the year 615 CE, Islam arrived in Africa without the current state of forcible conversion and conquest, frequently depicted, but through commerce, research, and the allure of its message of justice and equality. I said, concerning the vast Islamic empires and African educational hubs, the Mali man Sam Musa's empire, which was the richest individual in human history and utilized that money to construct libraries, universities, and mosques. I mentioned the Islamic capital of Timbuktu, academic pursuits when European cities were continuing to rise from the Dark Ages. I discussed how Islamic academics maintained and expanded knowledge in astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy that eventually led to the formation of the starting point of the European Renaissance. These are historical facts that are, in Western education, it is rarely taught. Systems. Instead, I stated Africa is shown as a gloomy continent that was colonized by Europeans and made civilized. However, in actuality, African Islamic civilizations were highly developed, rich and developed, whereas Europe was still archaic and feudal. The Timbuktu University was generating academics when Cambridge and Oxford were newly established. Freeman Morgan. For the first time, someone interrupted me. I have to admit, Captain Traore, none of this history was taught. Our history as African starts with slavery. We were cut off from our origins, from our societies. Was this information suppressed? I gave a nod, fully comprehending his query. Because, Mr. Freeman, information is power. The colonial endeavor needed the dehumanization of African people. They required to persuade both the world and themselves that we had no history and were barbarians, without culture, without civilization. This provided justification for slavery, colonization, which provided justification for our resources as well as the devastation of our communities. If Europeans accepted that Islamic civilizations in Africa were sophisticated and advanced, if they recognized that we had systems of justice, government, and education that were better than their own in many aspects, then the full ethical basis of colonization would end. I could see an alteration in Morgan Freeman's expression. A recognition was placed, possibly of realities he had sensed, but never quite expressed. I went on, are discussing the part Islam plays in resistance to colonialism. All through, Islam has led the way throughout history of opposition against oppression. When West Africa was colonized by the French, who headed the opposition, Muslim figures such as El-Hajj Umar Tal, Samurai II, and many more who fought for many years, opposing colonial rule. As soon as the Libya withstood Italian invasion, 20 years of them, a Muslim named Omar Mukhtar, combatant and scholar, the Algerian revolt against colonization by the French, was largely governed by Muslims who realized that their religion required for them to combat oppression and unfairness. I told him that this resistance's legacy endures today in various shapes. Our actions here, Mr. Freeman, is a member of the same custom. We're engaged in combat against neo-colonial colonialism, the French military participation in our nation, opposing the misuse of our resources from multinational companies, and, yes, this is informed by our Islamic beliefs. Struggle, as Islam instructs us to. There is no authority that we can bow to that goes against human dignity and fairness. Only God is subject to us, thus we bow to no colonizer, no monarch, and no oppressor. Then Morgan Freeman posed a query that a lot of people pose. However, Captain, how is the handling of Islamic women? This is frequently quoted as proof that Islam is incompatible with contemporary ideals of human equality and rights. I grinned, since this might Islam's most misinterpreted feature, especially in Western discourse. Mr. Let me tell you about women in Freeman. Islam according to the origins of our religion, not from the customs of some societies that are frequently mistaken for Islamic doctrine. The life of the Prophet Muhammad. Khadija, the first wife, was a prosperous businesswoman who hired him. She suggested getting married to him. She was his confidant, ally, and companion. According to the Prophet, heaven is located at the mother's feet. The best, he said, men who are the most adept at their spouses. He urged women to look for, learn, and take part in society. I described the ways in which women in early Islamic history were academics, soldiers, businesswomen, and leaders' advisors. Mr. Freeman, the issue is that a lot of Muslim-majority communities have been traumatized, colonized, and poor. Under these circumstances, cultural norms that are patriarchal and either predate or conflict with Islam been upheld, occasionally dishonestly ascribed to Islam itself. When you observe women's lack of access to basic education rights in certain Islamic nations, this is not Islam. This is a custom from the culture, frequently strengthened by authoritarian, Western-backed governments, due to the fact that they support Western objectives. I provided him with concrete instances. Saudi Arabia, claiming to speak for Islam, prohibited women from driving until lately. However, there was never an Islamic decision. It was both cultural and political choice. In the meantime, the West calls. Saudi Arabia sells them and is an ally. Weaponry worth billions of dollars while condemning Islam for its mistreatment of women. The level of hypocrisy is astounding. Where is concern for women's rights in the West, when they back autocrats who refuse to women's fundamental liberties? In what location is the women's concerns when Western bombs murder thousands of children and women in Palestine, Libya, Afghanistan, and Iraq? Morgan Freeman was silent for a while. Then he made a statement saying, shocked me. It seems to me that I've been observing the world in a very specific lens, and you're demonstrating that to me, that some things are purposefully kept beyond the frame. Exactly, I said, and it's no coincidence. The press, the educational frameworks, the political. In Western discourse, each of these are formed by advantageous power structures from specific stories and are intimidated by other people. The reality regarding Islam challenges the rationale for many conflicts in Muslim nations. The the reality of African Islam. Civilizations endangered the story of European supremacy and white supremacy, superiority. The reality of Islam's. The focus on economic fairness poses a threat. The system of capitalism that relies on inequity and exploitation. Next, I discuss the fundamentals of economics of Islam, as this is essential to understanding the reasons Islam is viewed as a danger from the world's capitalist powers. Islam forbids the use, charging, and loan interest. We refer to it in Arabic as riba. This ban is unchangeable and clear-cut in the Quran. Now consider on the implications of this for the world financial system that is completely based on interest. Consider the World Bank, the IMF, the whole framework of foreign debt that maintains African nations in a state of eternal servitude. Islam provides a different economic model, founded on risk-sharing, profit-sharing, and civic duty as opposed to acquiring wealth by taking on debt. Slavery. Morgan Freeman was visible, analyzing things, possibly making connections. It was the first time he had bonded. Islam requires zakat, a 2.5% wealth tax on collected fortune that will be given to the underprivileged. Charity is not what this is. It's an duty. Islam forbids stockpiling riches when others go hungry. The Prophet said that a group where someone going without food when others have enough. Faith, if these guidelines are truly, if put into practice, would generate an economic system that is essentially distinct from and endangering capitalism worldwide. I discussed how this economic factor of Islam is the reason why a lot of Muslim movements and leaders have been singled out and demolished. When Muhammad of Libya, Gaddafi advocated for an African money to take the place of the French franc and the value of the US dollar in African commerce, what occurred? Libya, among the most bombs were dropped on wealthy African countries into forgetfulness. Gaddafi was killed in the streets. Indeed, Gaddafi had a lot of defects. However, this business plan was a clear danger to the banking system in the West. Hedges. The same trend keeps happening. Over time, any Muslim leader or movement that poses significant difficulty, the term Western economic domination, radical and eradicated. Freeman Morgan asked, leaning forward, so you're claiming that the fight against terrorism is truly an economic conflict? In part, yes, I said. It's financial. It's geopolitics. Resources are at play, especially minerals and oil, and it's ideological as well. The West asserts that promoting human rights and democracy. However, what they're really disseminating is a system that works for their companies and continues to rule the world. Islam, when properly interpreted and practiced, provides opposition to this system. It provides a substitute perspective that places a high value on community, over justice, over profit, over individualism, spiritual growth as opposed to material accumulation. Next, I spoke to one of the most painful modern problems, the circumstances in Palestine. Mr. Freeman, you have spoken tales of hardship and opposition. You have provided a voice to campaigns for fairness. Thus, I must inquire, why is the Western world so silent? What about Palestine? For 75 years, Palestinians are no longer living there, slain, persecuted, and occupied. Their homes and land have been seized, destroyed, their kids sent in jail, and when they oppose, they are referred to as terrorists. When they make reference to global law, they are disregarded. Why? Morgan Freeman remained silent. Right away, I went on because recognizing Palestinian rights would imply admitting that a state, backed and financed by West Israel, is engaging in crimes against people. It would entail challenging the whole story about human rights and democracy, rights that the West cites to support its place in the world. Additionally, because, since Palestinians practice Islam, it's simpler to dehumanize them in order to illustrate their opposition as Islamic fanaticism instead than what it actually is, a conflict between people for their fundamental human rights as well as their land. I discussed the connection between this and the larger propaganda against Muslims. When mass murder is committed by a white nationalist in America, Norway, or New Zealand, we avoid referring to it as Christian terrorism. We label him mentally sick, a lone wolf, an deviation. However, when someone asserts, when a Muslim engages in violence, all of a sudden, Islamic terrorism is the cause, and all 1.8. It is the responsibility of 1 billion Muslims. This, the purposeful use of a double standard and poisonous Now Morgan Freeman appeared to be in real distress. Captain TR, you're going to show a viewpoint that is totally lacking from the American mainstream and the West. How about we listen to these voices? Because those in charge of the political elite, the media, and the educational establishments don't interest in elevating voices that contest their authority. I replied, when it comes to imperialism, Muslims are honest. Concerning Palestine, the duplicity of, in terms of Western foreign policy, they are suppressed, disregarded, or classified as radicals. The small number of Muslim voices that are provided with outlets in Western media, and those who follow Western narratives, who express regret for their beliefs, who acknowledge the framework that Islam must be updated or changed to conform to Western principles. I now talked with enthusiasm because this is an important topic, yet we decline this arrangement. Islam does not have to be changed. Muslims must genuinely adhere to Islam fully and correctly. We must go back to the groundbreaking sense of equality, fairness, and opposition to oppression that characterized Islam in its early years. We must deny the Islam is distorted by both Western propagandists as well as dishonest Muslims, leaders who rely on religion to uphold their authority while working for Western interests. What? Morgan Freeman inquired. By practicing Islam, do you mean appropriately? How would that appear? It would appear that we're attempting to construct in Burkina Faso. I answered, a justice-based society, where the citizens benefit from the nation's wealth, instead of multinational companies, society in which we disagree with the directives of the World Bank and IMF and create our own economic trajectory, a community in which we deny access to foreign military installations on our land and instead construct Pan-African solidarity and collaboration, a community that respects both our Islamic, our African identity and heritage, understanding that these aren't inconsistencies but complementary sources of power. I described our idea of Islamic civilization with roots in Pan-Africa. Mali is one of our historical examples. Songhai Empire, these were Africans from the Kanan Borneo Empire, Islamic societies that they are strong, wealthy, and just, traded on an equal basis with everyone in the planet, not as colonies. They gave birth to academics, scientists, artists, and architects. They welcomed and safeguarded the vulnerable, strangers, and kept up a social fairness. This is the example that we follow, not the colonizers' imposed model or imposed by institutions of neoliberalism. Morgan Freeman remained quiet for a while. After I was done, the cameras kept rolling, recording this moment of contemplation. After that, he spoke and everyone in the room was taken aback by the words. I came here with some questions, Captain Traoré, on governance and Islam. I'm departing with additional inquiries about what I believe to be history, international politics, and who are the true radicals. You've demonstrated to me that the story I've been exposed to throughout my life is insufficient, at most, and purposefully misleading at the worst. He added, as someone I am angry because I am of African origin, never instructed on these outstanding Islamic civilizations in Africa. I never found out concerning the advanced civilizations that existed prior to colonization. Rather, I was instructed in a history that starts with our servitude and depicts Africa as archaic and outdated. Additionally, I feel complicit in a system, American, that I can see better now has been founded on Muslim oppression and individuals in the global South. The voice now held real emotion. You've given me a lot to consider, lot to investigate, lot to reevaluate. Given what you shared today, I believe, needs a lot more people to hear it, despite my suspicion that there will be strong forces opposed to this message to disseminate. I gave a nod, gratitude for his candor. Mr. The reality, Freeman, has always been endangering those who profit from lies, but truth has its own strength. It strikes a chord with those who are fed up with manipulation and deceived. Given that you arrived here, that you listened receptively and, thinking, that you're open to changing your mind, what you've been instructed, which provides me with hope. The meeting ended quickly, following, but the recorded video, eventually, that day did reach audiences, and it was a spectacular response. A lot of folks were shocked to hear these viewpoints, at discovering this history, upon encountering the inconsistencies and duplicity of the way the West treats the Muslim world. Naturally, there were also people who I was attacked and labeled an extremist or an advocate, but this was anticipated. Truth is always met with opposition from those who have a stake in keeping lies alive. I share this with my siblings. I don't want to brag about my story with you. Unable to speak, I left an American celebrity, but to highlight an important issue. We have to take back our own stories. Additionally, our stories have been shared by others, determined who we were, analyzed our faith, as well as recorded our history. We have to talk for ourselves. We have to teach ourselves and our kids regarding the Islam's truth, not the warped version offered by either Western media or radical organizations, but Islam of fairness, wisdom, empathy, and opposition against oppression. We also need to acknowledge that our African fight is related to the challenges faced by Muslims and oppressed populations worldwide. The opposition against French colonialism in West Africa has ties to the Palestinian liberation struggle. The opposition to IMF exploitation is associated with the opposition to Middle Eastern imperialism by the United States. The adversary we are all up against is a worldwide dominance structure based on racism, exploitation, and the accumulation of riches and authority in the hands of a few. Islam provides us with the moral and spiritual underpinnings behind this struggle. We learn from it that this life is a test that will be administered, responsible for our response to unfairness, that we have to support the oppressed, even at our own expense. It encourages us to have courage when facing oppression, to exercise patience while difficulty, to show generosity even in shortage, and to always maintain our ideals for short-term material gain. I follow this form of Islam, which directs my leadership, which motivates our Burkina Faso's revolution. This is the Islam which established powerful civilizations in Africa, which can rebuild them if we continue to adhere to its genuine teachings and reject the misrepresentations that are forced upon by its adversaries. Thus, when people inquire how I managed to balance my Muslim faith with being a fighter and a revolutionary, opposing imperialism, including voicing opposition to strong nations, I inform them that I am revolutionary due to my Muslim faith. Islam instructs me to fight against oppression. Islam requires me to protect the feeble. Islam tells me to turn away from any power that is in conflict with divine fairness. May Allah lead each of us on the way of justice and truth, and may we possess the bravery to say the truth even when it's unpopular, to maintain when we are by ourselves, and to never give up our freedom and dignity to every oppressor, regardless of their level of power they might show up. Thank you.